On the way to marry his fiancée, the millionaire saw his ex at a bus stop, holding twins who looked exactly like him. Jace McLaughlin had planned every second of this morning. The custom-tailored suit hung perfectly across his shoulders. The driver had polished the car twice before sunrise. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from executives, wedding planners, and relatives reminding him that today wasn't just another deal closing. It was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. Yet none of that mattered the instant his foot slammed onto the brake pedal. The tires screeched sharply against the quiet suburban road, the sudden stop throwing him forward in his seat. His driver shouted in surprise, but Jace barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on the bus stop just ahead, the one he had passed 100 times without a thought. Two small children stood there, gripping the hands of a woman he had not seen in 10 years. At first, his mind rejected the sight. The girl was brushing crumbs from her coat sleeve. The boy stared down the street with a serious expression far too old for his face. Their hair was dark. Their skin held the same warm tone as his, but it was their eyes that stole the air from Jace's lungs. Those eyes were his, the shape, the deep-set gaze, the faint crease at the corner when they blinked. He had stared at that reflection in mirrors all his life, yet now it was standing several yards away, duplicated twice in bodies no older than 5. The woman turned slightly as a bus passed, and that was when recognition struck with the force of a physical blow. Estelle. Her name echoed inside him, uninvited and unwelcome. The woman he once promised the world. The woman he left behind with little more than apologies and unreachable phone numbers. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was busy adjusting the strap of a worn backpack on the boy's shoulder. The girl tugged on her sleeve, whispering something he couldn't hear through the closed window. Jace's chest tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a trick of the mind. This was the moment his carefully built life cracked wide open in the middle of a forgotten street, beneath a shelter with peeling paint and a bent bench, a place he never expected to find the most important truth of his existence. He whispered under his breath, "No, this can't be real." But it was, and he was sitting in a luxury car, dressed to walk down the aisle, while his past waited quietly at a bus stop with 2 children who carried his face. Have you ever chased something so hard that you forgot what you were leaving behind? Not just a job, not just a dream, but a person, a promise, a version of yourself that once believed love mattered more than the next promotion or the next big win. Somewhere in the world right now, there's a phone that hasn't rung in years, a message that was never answered, a goodbye that sounded temporary, even though it turned into forever. Jace used to tell himself that sacrifices were necessary, that no one builds an empire without burning a few bridges, that if you focus long enough on the future, the past will eventually stop knocking. But standing in that silent car, staring at 2 children he had never met, he understood something painful. Ambition doesn't erase memory, it only postpones the reckoning. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you told yourself just a little longer, while someone important waited on the other end of your absence. Maybe you chose growth over connection, success over presence, tomorrow over today. And now, if you're honest, you wonder what became of the life you stepped away from. Was it still there, or did it move forward without you, carrying pieces of you that you never even knew existed? Jace had no answer for that question. Not yet. All he knew was that the life he thought he understood had just challenged him in the most public way possible. Not in a boardroom, not through a lawsuit or a scandal, but through 2 quiet little faces staring down the street, unaware that the man sitting in the expensive car behind them was questioning every choice he had ever made. And if this moment is stirring something in you, a memory, a regret, or even a quiet hope, then stay with this story. Because Jace is about to face the one decision ambition never prepares you for. The dashboard clock blinked, 9:12 a.m. In less than 2 hours, Jace was expected to stand before hundreds of guests in a lakeside venue wrapped in white flowers and promises he wasn't sure he could keep. His fiancée, Kiara Reynolds, would be stepping into a dress that cost more than the rent on the apartment he once shared with Estelle. Cameras would flash, applause would rise, the story of his success would be sealed with a ring. And yet, here he was, frozen behind the steering wheel, staring at the one life he never accounted for in his rise to the top. The driver cleared his throat. "Sir, should I pull over?" Jace didn't answer. His attention stayed locked on the bus stop. Estelle was now crouched in front of the girl, tying her shoelace with fingers that moved from long habit, not ease. The boy stood nearby, watching every passing car as if expecting someone who never came. Those gestures were not new to Jace. He had once watched Estelle move like that, caring without needing to be seen, doing the quiet work that keeps families standing when everything else falls apart. Only now the children were part of the picture. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. They're lining everyone up for photos. "Where are you?" The words blurred on the screen. He imagined Kiara waiting under silk drapes, smiling for people who didn't know how little room his heart had left for ceremony. She was kind. She had stood by him through business chaos, social pressure, and the endless demands of wealth. She believed she was about to marry a man whose past was fully closed. But it wasn't. It was standing 20 feet away, holding a boy and a girl who shared his eyes. Jace finally opened the door. The sound of it breaking the stillness made Estelle glance up. Their eyes met for the first time in a decade. Her face went pale. Not from anger, not from surprise alone, but from recognition that a chapter she had sealed with strength was suddenly wide open again. Jace stepped onto the sidewalk in shoes meant for polished floors, not cracked concrete. He took one step closer, then another, until he was standing just behind the shelter. "Estelle," he said. His voice trembled, not loud, not dramatic. Just a man who realized the most important conversation of his life was starting at a place no one ever looks twice at. The boy turned and stared at him. "You look like me," he said plainly. Jace dropped to one knee without thinking. That single sentence had placed him between two futures, one built from comfort and expectation, the other from responsibility and truth. And there was no route that allowed him to keep both. Jace didn't know what hurt more, the boy's calm certainty or the silence that followed it. He searched Estelle's face for answers she wasn't offering. Her lips parted as if to speak, then pressed together again, guarding years of strength that had no intention of crumbling in front of a man who once walked away. The girl studied him too, her head tilted slightly, curiosity bright in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't shy. She was simply trying to understand why a stranger felt familiar. Jace's heart pounded against his ribs. This wasn't the kind of problem money could smooth over. There was no contract for this moment, no assistant to delegate it to, no board meeting where he could hide behind data. Every direction led to loss. If he turned back to the car, he would walk into a wedding that would always carry the shadow of this bus stop. He would say vows while seeing two small faces in his mind, knowing he had chosen comfort over courage. If he stayed, even for a few minutes, the entire structure of his life would start to shift. The ceremony, the expectations, the version of himself he had carefully constructed. All of it stood on a thin edge now. He looked down at the boy again. "What's your name?" Jace asked. The child blinked once, then replied, "Leo." "And you?" he said to the girl. "Charlie." Two names that landed inside him like anchors. Estelle finally spoke. Her voice was steady but not cold. "You're not supposed to be here, Jace." He swallowed. "I didn't know," he said. "About them." Her gaze didn't accuse, it didn't forgive. It simply held truth. "Well," she replied, "now you do." And in that moment, with traffic rolling past and a wedding dress waiting miles away, Jace understood that nothing about his future could stay the same. Stay with this story, because what he chooses in the next few hours will determine whether wealth defines his life or whether he finally learns what success really is. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to welcome you to Mr. Williams Storytime, a place where we don't just tell stories, we explore the choices that shape real lives. If you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one that challenge the heart and remind us what truly matters. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you were standing in Jace's shoes right now, wedding only hours away, children you never knew existed staring back at you, what would you do? Would you walk away from the ceremony? Would you ask for time? Or would you choose the life you planned and leave the rest behind? Drop your thoughts below, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and stay with me, because Jace's next step will change everything. Jace McLaughlin's penthouse woke before he did. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in pale morning light, gliding across marble counters, velvet furniture, and walls decorated with framed magazine covers bearing his name. Everything about the place announced achievement. The view alone stretched from the river all the way to the downtown skyline, a reminder that he now lived far above the streets he once hurried across with loose change in his pocket. A team of people filled the apartment before breakfast. Stylists hung silk ties in perfect rows. A tailor adjusted the sleeve of his jacket with careful hands. Someone brought in coffee from a cafe that charged more for a single cup than he used to spend on groceries for a week. Yet for all its elegance, the penthouse felt empty. Not physically, emotionally. The rooms were quiet in a way that didn't invite rest. No clutter of everyday life. No photos of shared laughter taped crookedly to a fridge. No worn couch cushions that had memorized the shape of two people leaning close. He stood in front of the mirror while someone straightened his collar. The man looking back had everything he once prayed for: wealth, recognition, influence, the kind of future that made parents proud and strangers curious. But the reflection didn't smile. He remembered mornings in a cramped apartment where the heat barely worked. Estelle used to sit on the kitchen counter while he burned toast, teasing him about his inability to manage a simple meal. They would laugh about how poor they were and how rich they planned to be someday, measuring dreams instead of square footage. Now he had all the space in the world, and no one to share it with. A voice from the living room broke the silence. "Mr. McLaughlin, the car will be ready in 15 minutes. He nodded, though no one was looking at him. This was supposed to be the moment where joy overflowed, where anticipation replaced doubt, where a man steps into the day he'll remember for the rest of his life. Instead, Jace felt like a guest in his own celebration, moving through rooms that were too clean, too controlled, too distant from the version of himself that once believed love was the greatest form of success. Jace sat at the edge of his bed while the apartment buzzed with activity around him, yet inside his chest everything was strangely still. He had closed deals worth more than entire neighborhoods. He had stood on stages where strangers clapped for him, simply because his name appeared on a screen. He had mastered the art of walking into any room with confidence, knowing he belonged there. So why did he feel like an outsider in the most important moment of his life? His phone rested in his palm, lighting up with messages that felt more like reminders than congratulations. "Can't wait to see you at the altar. Proud of you, son. This is your day." He should have been excited. He should have been counting down the minutes. Instead, his thoughts wandered to places he hadn't visited in years: a crooked stairwell that smelled of dust, a chipped coffee mug with a cartoon sun on it, the sound of Estelle humming while folding laundry. Those memories didn't belong in this world of tailored suits and glossy invitations. He had locked them away because they didn't fit the story he was building. But stories don't stay locked forever. As the stylists talked quietly among themselves, Jace pressed his thumb against the edge of his phone screen, hovering over Kiara's contact name. He tried to summon the feelings that were supposed to live there: excitement, certainty, the calm that comes when a man knows he has chosen well. All he felt was weight. Not the kind that drags you down suddenly, but the slow kind that settles over years of decisions, stacking one after another until the foundation starts to crack. He stood and walked toward the window, watching traffic far below. Tiny figures moved along the sidewalks like they had places to be, lives to attend to. He used to be one of them, rushing, hoping, believing that once he reached the top, everything inside him would finally make sense. Yet here he was, at the top, and the silence was louder than ever. "Today changes everything," someone said behind him. Jace nodded again, though the words felt wrong. Today didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a question he had been avoiding for a decade, finally asking for an answer. The car slipped away from the glass towers of downtown and into streets that no longer appeared on the brochures handed out to visiting investors. Here, the sidewalks were cracked, patched more times than anyone could count. Storefronts wore sun-faded signs advertising haircuts, pawn loans, and grocery specials that changed every week. Jace watched it all through tinted windows, feeling like a traveler moving through a former life rather than a groom headed toward his future. He hadn't planned this route. The driver had taken it to avoid traffic, but to Jace it felt deliberate, as though the city itself decided to remind him where everything began. He spotted the corner where he used to wait for Estelle after work. The bakery that once sold day-old bread for half price was now boarded up. A laundromat glowed softly in the distance, its windows fogged by warm air and long hours. These streets had raised him. They had shaped the hunger that pushed him beyond them, yet he had not returned in years, too busy building a life that required him to forget the one that came before it. The farther they drove, the heavier his chest felt. A familiar bus stop appeared ahead, small, overlooked, easy to miss. He had passed it countless times in his youth, sometimes with Estelle by his side, sometimes alone, wondering if his dreams were foolish. Today, it slowed him. The driver reduced speed as they approached a line of cars inching through a light. Jace leaned forward slightly, not yet knowing why his attention had sharpened, only that something ahead was pulling at him with quiet insistence. Then he saw movement beneath the shelter, a woman adjusting a child's coat, two small figures standing close to her. His breath caught. The car was still rolling when Jace's foot came down. Hard, not with the careful pressure he used when easing to a stoplight, but with the reflex of someone trying to halt time itself. The sound of rubber against asphalt cut sharply through the quiet interior, sending a jolt through every passenger. "Sir!" the driver exclaimed, gripping the wheel. Jace didn't answer. The world outside the windshield had narrowed to a single point, the small figure beneath the shelter lifting her head at the sound. The motion was simple, almost ordinary, but it sent a shock through him that no market crash ever had. Estelle, her hair was tied back the way she used to wear it on long workdays. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes now, signs of years lived with purpose rather than comfort. She looked thinner, stronger, more solid than the girl he once knew. And beside her stood two children, not side by side as strangers might, but close, shoulder to shoulder, with the easy connection of siblings who shared everything. The boy kicked at a loose pebble. The girl held a stuffed animal with one ear nearly torn off. Jace felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, even though he was still sitting in the same seat, still wearing the same suit meant for celebration. "Pull over," he said at last, his voice hoarse. The driver hesitated, then guided the car toward the curb. Jace's pulse filled his ears. He watched Estelle glance down at the children, unaware that a man she once loved had just slammed his way into a truth that would rewrite his life. The door opened before the car had fully settled. Jace stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city noise rushing back into his senses. Distant engines, a barking dog, the faint rattle of a bus several blocks away. None of it mattered. His attention was locked on the small family a few yards in front of him. Estelle noticed him this time. Her eyes widened, then softened into something harder to read. Not anger, not relief, but the steady look of someone who had learned how to carry heavy things without complaint. "Jace," she said quietly. Hearing his name in her voice again felt like stepping into a memory he had sealed off years ago. He took a step closer, then stopped, unsure of the space he was allowed to occupy. The boy peered at him from behind his mother's coat. His stare was bold, searching. The girl clutched her worn stuffed animal and leaned closer to Estelle's side. Jace dropped down so he was level with them, though he didn't fully understand why his body had decided this posture was necessary. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Jace." The boy tilted his head, studying him the way children do when they sense truth but don't yet have language for it. "You look like me," the boy said. Jace felt the words more than he heard them. Estelle closed her eyes briefly, then rested a hand on each child's shoulder. "This is Leo," she said, touching the boy. "And this is Charlie. 2 names, 2 lives, 2 reflections of a man who had spent 10 years believing he left everything behind." Jace stood there, caught between the future he had planned and the family he never knew existed, and for the first time since he built his empire, he had no idea what to do next. Before boardrooms, before headlines, before anyone cared who Jace McLaughlin was, there had been a narrow staircase that creaked under every step. He used to take those stairs 2 at a time, keys jangling in his hand, already smiling because he knew Estelle would be on the other side of the door. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that leaned slightly to the left, as if it had grown tired of standing straight after decades of holding other people's hopes. The place smelled faintly of old wood and whatever their neighbors were cooking. The hallway light flickered, sometimes going out entirely, forcing Jace to count steps in the dark. Yet the moment he pushed open the door, everything felt right. The living room was barely wide enough for their mismatched couch and a coffee table they'd rescued from the curb. A thin rug tried its best to hide the cold floorboards. Their kitchen was nothing more than a line of cabinets pressed against one wall, with a stove that took forever to heat. But it was theirs. Estelle had hung handwritten notes on the fridge, reminders to pay the electric bill, jokes about his habit of losing socks, tiny hearts drawn in marker. A single plant sat on the windowsill, its leaves curling toward the light as though reaching for something better. Jace used to stand in that doorway sometimes and think, this is where everything begins. He would drop his bag by the couch, kick off his shoes, and listen for her humming from the kitchen or the bathroom. It was never loud, never meant for performance, just a soft sound of someone comfortable in her own space. Money was always tight. They shared one set of dishes because they'd broken the others. The ceiling leaked when it rained too hard. But when Jace closed his eyes now, years later, the first place his mind traveled wasn't the penthouse or the corner office. It was that crooked little apartment where dreams were bigger than the rooms that held them. Their dreams didn't come with blueprints. They were scribbled on scrap paper, spoken out loud over cheap dinners, imagined during late nights when sleep felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. Jace would sit at the small kitchen table, his laptop balanced on a stack of old magazines to keep it from wobbling. He worked on ideas that no one else believed in yet, business plans that promised growth he couldn't yet explain, sketches of logos he'd erase and redraw a dozen times. Estelle would perch on the counter, legs swinging gently, offering opinions even when she didn't fully understand the industry jargon he threw around. Make it simpler, she'd say, leaning over his shoulder. If I can't understand it, nobody else will. Sometimes she brought home leftovers from the cafe where she worked. They'd eat straight from the containers, laughing about customers who treated coffee like a personality trait and managers who took themselves far too seriously. On nights when the world outside felt especially heavy, they'd spread blankets on the floor and talk about the future as if it were a place they were already visiting. You're going to do something big, Estelle would tell him. I don't know what yet, but I can see it in how you don't quit. He used to shrug it off, pretending confidence, while quietly storing every word. No investor ever gave him the kind of faith she did. No mentor ever sat with him through rejection emails, reminding him that one closed door didn't define a lifetime. They weren't just making plans, they were building belief. And in that small apartment, with bills taped to the fridge and hopes stacked higher than their furniture, Jace thought he understood what it meant to succeed. There were days when Jace came home carrying more doubt than groceries, another pitch ignored, another meeting cut short, another polite email that said we've decided to move in a different direction. He tried not to let it show, but Estelle always noticed. She could read the slope of his shoulders better than any resume reviewer ever could. She never asked him to explain first. Instead, she would pour 2 cups of tea from the same chipped kettle they'd owned since moving in, hand him one, and wait until he was ready. They don't see you yet, she'd say. That doesn't mean they won. Sometimes he argued, told her she was being hopeful for no reason, that the world didn't reward effort, only timing and luck. She would shake her head and smile, like she was looking at someone who just hadn't learned their own strength. You're going to change things, she insisted. Not because you want to be rich, but because you refuse to accept the limits people give you. She taped encouraging notes above his desk, short messages written in her careful handwriting. Don't forget who you are. This idea matters. On nights when anxiety kept him awake, she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat until it slowed, reminding him with quiet closeness that he wasn't alone in the struggle. Her belief wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It was steady, constant, like the way sunlight fills a room without asking permission. And without realizing it, Jace began to rely on that faith more than he relied on himself. Success didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, disguised as opportunity. The first consulting job required Jace to stay late downtown. Then a second client wanted him to travel for the week. Then a startup across the state offered him a role that sounded like everything he'd been working toward. Each time, he told Estelle it was temporary. Just until things stabilize, he said, packing his bag while she leaned against the doorframe, forcing a smile she didn't fully feel. Phone calls replaced shared dinners. Text messages stood in for the soft moments they used to protect so fiercely. When he came home, he was distracted, his mind still chasing deals that didn't sleep. Estelle tried to adjust. She cooked meals he reheated days later. She waited up even when exhaustion blurred her vision. She listened to stories about people she'd never meet in places she'd never go. But the space between them kept growing, not through arguments, but through absence. The apartment, once full of plans and laughter, began to feel like a waiting room. Jace was always either leaving or preparing to leave again. Estelle watched him chase a future that seemed to require less of her with every passing month, and though she never said, out loud, a quiet question began to echo in her heart. When did building a dream start costing us each other? The change didn't arrive with slammed doors or raised voices. It arrived in silence. Jace stopped noticing the notes on the fridge. The jokes that once made him laugh barely registered as he rushed past them to answer another call. Estelle stopped reminding him to eat dinner, stopped asking when he'd be home, stopped believing that every goodbye was temporary. They still shared the same bed, but their conversations felt shorter, thinner, as if someone had turned down the volume on the life they once knew. One night, Jace came in well past midnight. Estelle was awake, sitting on the edge of the couch with the lights off, the television playing to no one. "You forgot my birthday," she said. He froze in the doorway, confusion flashing across his face before it settled into guilt. He apologized quickly, clumsily, blaming deadlines, meetings, stress, every word proof that the world he was building had started to crowd her out. She nodded, accepting the apology the way people do when they don't expect change. After that, warmth became something they remembered rather than felt. Their hugs were polite, their laughter rare. The future they once imagined together began to sound like a story from another lifetime, and without realizing it, Jay stepped farther into a world that had room for his ambition, but less and less space for the girl who believed in him when no one else did. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt no different from any other. Jace had just finished explaining yet another idea to a room of polite faces that never quite leaned forward. He closed his laptop, thanked everyone, and walked out with that familiar tightness in his chest, the feeling that effort alone wasn't enough. In the hallway, his phone buzzed. Subject: Opportunity for Senior Development Lead, West Coast Expansion. He read it twice before his pulse caught up with the words. A technology firm he'd been courting for months wanted him to relocate, not for a trial project or a short-term contract, but for a permanent role with authority, resources, and a salary that felt unreal. It was everything he had imagined when he sat at the tiny kitchen table years ago, sketching dreams on the backs of receipts. He stared at the message, the hallway blurring around him. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something he had to chase. It felt like something finally moving toward him. When he called Estelle, his voice trembled with excitement he couldn't hide. "They want me out west," he said. "Not just a visit, a real position. This is it." There was a pause on the other end. "That's amazing," she replied carefully. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table that night, the job offer open on Jace's laptop between them like a third presence in the room. He talked about career ladders and long-term vision, about how this move could change everything for them, about how it would only be for a while. Estelle listened without interrupting, her fingers wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. "You'd be on the other side of the country," she said softly. "I'll come back," he replied too quickly. "I'll visit all the time. This doesn't have to change us." Her eyes searched his face, looking for the boy who once promised never to let success turn into distance. "You don't sound like someone who plans to come back," she said. The room felt smaller than ever. He stood and paced, trying to explain the pressure he felt, how long he had waited for this, how tired he was of barely getting by, how this chance might never come again. Estelle rose too, stepping in front of him, her hands trembling slightly. "I believe in your dream," she said. "I always have. I just don't know where I fit inside it anymore." They held each other after that, not with the warmth of comfort, but with the sadness of people already grieving something that wasn't gone yet. Neither of them cried. They didn't need to. The goodbye had already begun. The suitcase was too big for the apartment. It stood open in the center of the room, swallowing neatly folded clothes that felt more like symbols than necessities. Jace moved quickly, filling space with motion so he wouldn't have to linger in the quiet. "I'll call every night," he said, not looking up. "And I'll be back before you know it." Estelle sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap. She nodded when he spoke, the way people do when they want to believe something even while knowing it may never happen. At the door, he turned, keys in hand, heart thudding with excitement and fear mixed together. "This is for us," he added. "Just hold on a little longer." She walked him down the stairs, each step echoing too loudly. At the bottom, they stood facing each other in the narrow hallway that had once felt like the gateway to everything. Jace leaned in and kissed her forehead. "I love you," he said. "I know," she replied, and then he was gone. The messages came at first, quick updates about new offices, unfamiliar streets, meetings that ran too long. Then the replies slowed. Calls were missed. Weeks passed before months did. Every promise he made stretched thinner with distance until it finally snapped without a sound. Estelle didn't feel different at first. She was just tired, more than usual, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. She blamed the long shifts at the cafe, the quiet apartment, the weight of learning to live without someone who used to fill every corner of her day. It wasn't until a customer asked if she was feeling well, noticing how pale she'd become, that the thought crossed her mind. She stopped at a pharmacy on her way home, standing in an aisle she never imagined she'd need, holding a small box that felt heavier than it should. That night, she sat alone on the edge of the bathtub, staring at a strip of plastic that carried more meaning than any conversation she'd had in months. Her hands shook. Jace was thousands of miles away, busy building a life that no longer included her voice at the end of the day. She considered calling him, imagined what she would say, imagined the silence that might follow. So she didn't. She lay back on the cold tile and closed her eyes, pressing one palm to her stomach as the truth settled in quietly. She wasn't alone anymore. And somehow, that both comforted her and terrified her at the same time. The days that followed rewrote Estelle's life without asking permission. She left the apartment they once shared because every corner echoed with promises that had lost their meaning. She found a smaller place closer to work, one where the walls didn't carry memories she couldn't afford to revisit. At first, she wrote to Jace, short messages, careful updates, words that stopped just shy of asking for anything. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. That moment never came. Weeks turned into months, months into years. His name stayed in her contacts long after she stopped expecting it to light up her screen. When Leo and Charlie were born, she held their tiny hands and wondered how two hearts could beat so strongly without the man who gave them half of who they were. She learned how to be everything at once, provider, teacher, comfort, strength. She learned to stretch groceries and patience. She learned to smile when she was exhausted and to keep moving when stopping felt easier. And somewhere along the way, she stopped checking her phone altogether. Silence became her normal, not because it hurt less, but because it was the only way forward. The street felt smaller once Jace was standing on it. Inside the car, everything had been filtered. Muted sounds, tinted glass, the comfortable distance between him and anything real. But the moment his shoes met the uneven pavement, the world pressed in around him with all the details he usually paid people to ignore. A bus roared past in the far lane, its rush of air fluttering Estelle's coat. Someone across the street argued loudly into a phone, the smell of exhaust mixed with the faint sweetness of a nearby bakery. Jace took a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and walked toward the shelter. Each step felt heavier than the last. He was dressed for a celebration that now seemed like it belonged to someone else's life, not his. The crisp suit, the polished shoes, they looked out of place here, moving through a neighborhood that had no patience for display. Estelle hadn't turned around yet. She was bent slightly toward the children, fixing the girl's hat, her movements careful and practiced. Jace noticed the small things he never would have seen from the car, the way her shoulders stayed squared even while leaning down, the gentle firmness in her hands. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure how close he was allowed to be after so many years. "Estelle," he said. Her name left his mouth with a tremor that startled him. The world didn't stop. Cars kept passing, people kept walking. But for Jace, that single step out of the car had already changed everything. She straightened slowly, as though any sudden movement might shatter the fragile balance she'd built around her life. For a heartbeat, Estelle simply stared at him. Jace watched recognition pass across her face, not the kind that blooms with joy, but the kind that tightens the jaw and steadies the spine. She had learned long ago how to hold herself together when the world delivered surprises she didn't ask for. "Jace," she said, almost under her breath. The children shifted beside her, sensing the change in the air without knowing its cause. Estelle placed a hand on each of their shoulders, grounding herself in the weight of their presence. He took a step closer, then another. He wanted to explain, to ask questions, to somehow fit 10 years of absence into one honest sentence. But none came. Her eyes flicked briefly to the car idling at the curb, then back to him. The glance was quick, controlled, but it carried a message. She understood exactly what kind of life he was living now. "You shouldn't be here," she said. It wasn't anger in her voice. It was protection, of herself, of the children, of a reality she had worked too hard to keep standing. Jace opened his mouth, closed it again. The past stood between them, unspoken yet impossible to ignore, while Estelle held her ground with the calm strength of someone who had already survived the worst. Leo was the first to break the silence. He leaned slightly out from behind Estelle's coat, studying Jace with the unfiltered honesty only children possess. His eyes traveled from the polished shoes to the careful part in Jace's hair, then back up to his face. "Mom," he whispered, not quietly enough, "why does that man look like me?" Charlie followed his gaze. She tilted her head, comparing details with a seriousness far beyond her years. Her small fingers traced the curve of her own eyebrow as if checking whether it matched his. Jace felt a strange pull in his chest, as though some invisible thread had been tied between them without his consent. Estelle inhaled slowly, preparing herself before responding. "He's someone I used to know," she said. Leo frowned. "From where?" Her answer didn't come right away. Jace knelt slightly, lowering himself to their level, careful not to cross a line he didn't yet understand. From this close, the similarities were impossible to deny. The same shape of nose, the same deep brown eyes, the same thoughtful pause before speaking. The truth was written plainly across their faces. He just hadn't known how to read it before. Jace rested one knee on the pavement, steadying himself as if gravity had changed direction. The world shrank to the three of them, the woman he once loved, and the two children who held pieces of him he had never seen. "I'm Jace," he said gently. Leo stared back, brow furrowed in concentration. He wasn't shy about it. He examined Jace the way kids inspect a puzzle, turning pieces in their minds until they make sense. "You look like me," Leo said. The words were simple, but they struck harder than any accusation ever could. Charlie's eyes widened. She glanced at her brother, then at Jace, then back again, suddenly seeing the same thing Leo had noticed first. Her mouth formed a small O, as though a door had opened somewhere inside her. Estelle's breath caught. She reached for the twins without taking her eyes off Jace, one hand on each child, anchoring them close. For Jace, the street seemed to tilt. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't chance. It was a reflection of choices made and consequences delayed, a reality that no success story could hide. And in that single sentence from a boy who had never met him, the life he thought he understood began to fall apart. Jace tried to speak, but his throat refused to cooperate. Every confident sentence he had rehearsed over the years, about leadership, vision, ambition, vanished in the face of two children who didn't know his name yet carried his reflection. He stood slowly, afraid that if he moved too fast, the moment would vanish like a dream. His eyes darted from Leo to Charlie, taking in every detail as though he were trying to memorize lives he had already missed. "I didn't know," he said at last. The words sounded empty even to him. Estelle studied him with a mixture of caution and sorrow. "No," she replied quietly. "You didn't." Traffic passed behind them. The bus schedule rattled in the wind against the shelter frame. Ordinary sounds, yet Jace felt detached from all of it, like he was standing in the middle of someone else's story. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat thudding hard, unsteady. This wasn't fear of loss in business. This was the realization that something irreplaceable had been absent from his life, and he hadn't even known to miss it. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow's headlines or next quarter's goals. He was thinking about how many first steps, how many bedtime stories, how many small moments had happened without him. And he didn't know if there was a way to make up for any of it. Leo didn't look away. Most children his age would have hidden behind their mother's legs or pretended the strange man in the nice clothes wasn't there. Leo did the opposite. He stood a little straighter, curiosity written plainly across his face, as if the situation were a mystery he intended to solve. "Why are you wearing those shoes?" he asked suddenly. Jace blinked. Of all the questions he expected, that wasn't one of them. "They're special shoes," Jace replied, unsure whether honesty or simplicity was safer. Leo frowned thoughtfully. "They don't look good for running." The comment landed with surprising weight. Jace glanced down at the polished leather that had never known dirt, then back at the boy who judged the world by how well it handled motion. "What kind of shoes do you like?" Jace asked. Leo brightened. "The ones with the blue stripes. They make me faster." Estelle watched the exchange carefully, arms folded loosely across her chest. She didn't interrupt, but her eyes never left the space between Jace and her son. Leo stepped closer, not enough to touch, but close enough for Jace to see a faint freckle near the corner of his left eye, the exact place Jace had one when he was a child. "How old are you?" Leo asked. 33, Jace said. Leo wrinkled his nose. "That's really old." Jace laughed quietly before he could stop himself. It was the first real sound of joy that had escaped him all day. Leo smiled in response, pleased that his words had created something good. While Leo pressed forward with questions, Charlie stayed half a step behind, her small hand gripping the sleeve of Estelle's coat. She didn't stare at Jace the way her brother did. Instead, she peeked at him in short glances, as if afraid that holding his gaze too long might change something she wasn't ready to understand. Jace noticed her hesitation and softened his posture, lowering himself again so he wouldn't tower over her. "Hi, Charlie," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "That's a nice toy." She looked down at the stuffed animal tucked under her arm, the one with the torn ear, then back up at him. Her eyes held a quiet kindness, the sort that doesn't announce itself. "My bear," she whispered. "What's his name?" Jace asked. She hesitated, then leaned closer to Estelle before answering as though borrowing courage. "Sonny," Jace smiled. "He looks like he's been on a lot of adventures." Her lips curved upward just enough to be seen. It wasn't the open curiosity of her brother, but something just as powerful, a warmth that flickered into existence despite uncertainty. And Jace realized that trust doesn't always arrive with bold steps. Sometimes it begins with a whisper. The space between them felt thinner now, not gone, but no longer sealed tight by confusion or fear. Jace shifted his weight, sitting back on his heels so he was level with the children, letting the tension in his shoulders ease just enough to invite something gentler into the moment. "So," he said carefully, "what do you two like to do after school?" Leo answered immediately. "I like drawing cars, the really fast ones." Charlie took a second longer, then said, "I like when Mom reads the animal book." Estelle watched, still quiet, but the edge in her stance softened just a fraction. Jace nodded as if these were the most important facts he'd learned all year. "Those sound like good things." Leo tilted his head again. "Do you live in that shiny car?" Jace smiled at the description. "No, I just ride in it sometimes." Charlie glanced toward the vehicle, then back at her mother. "He talks nice," she murmured. Jace felt something warm spread through him. Not relief, not triumph, but a cautious hope. A tiny bridge forming where there had been nothing but distance before. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't understanding. It was simply connection, fragile as glass, but real. If this moment between Jace, Leo, and Charlie is touching your heart right now, take a second to support Mr. Williams' story time by hitting that like button. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with someone who believes that second chances and family still matter in a world that often rushes past them. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Estelle's alarm went off every morning at 5:30, long before the sun thought about rising. She would slide quietly out of bed so she wouldn't wake the twins, pull on her uniform, and step into a kitchen that was never quite warm enough. The kettle took its time. The floor always felt cold. Her first job was at a cafe near the train station, the kind of place that smelled like burned coffee by noon and never slowed down enough for anyone to catch their breath. She tied her apron tight, forced a smile, and worked through the rush as if each customer were the only one who mattered. By mid-morning, when her shift ended, she didn't go home. She walked 3 blocks to a small daycare center where she cleaned classrooms, wiped tables, and stacked tiny chairs while other people's children napped. The irony never escaped her, spending hours caring for a building meant to nurture kids, then rushing back across town to barely make it home before her own got out of school. Her phone stayed in her pocket all day, not because it was full of messages, but because it wasn't. When she finally returned to the apartment in the evening, she didn't sit down. Dinner had to be made. Homework checked, baths supervised, stories read. Exhaustion lived in her bones, but it was quiet, disciplined, refusing to complain. Because she wasn't working for herself, she was working for 2 small lives who depended on her strength even when no one else did. From the outside, Estelle's life looked simple. A small apartment, a routine, 2 polite children who said thank you and held doors for strangers. People assumed things were steady because nothing seemed broken. They didn't see the nights when she stood in the kitchen counting bills twice, hoping the numbers would change the second time. They didn't hear the sigh she let out before opening the fridge, wondering how to stretch what was left until Friday. When the twins were sick, she didn't call anyone for help. She balanced a cool cloth on one forehead while stirring soup with the other hand, whispering reassurances even when her own voice trembled. She learned how to fix broken toys with glue that barely held, how to sew buttons back onto school shirts, how to smile through parent meetings while silently worrying about next month's rent. Her tears, when they came, waited until the bathroom door was locked and the water was running so the children wouldn't hear. Then she dried her face, straightened her shoulders, and stepped back into the role she never took a day off from. No one applauded this work, but it was the quiet labor that kept her family standing. Estelle didn't teach Leo and Charlie about kindness with lectures. She taught them with mornings that started before sunrise and evenings that ended only after both were tucked into bed, with small choices that added up over years, returning lost gloves, helping neighbors carry groceries, thanking bus drivers by name. When Leo asked why they gave half their dinner to a man who waited outside the corner store some nights, she didn't speak about obligation or charity. "We have enough," she said simply. "That means we share." Charlie once brought home a classmate who had nowhere to go for the afternoon. Estelle set another plate at the table without a question, then listened to the girls chatter as if nothing in the world could be more important. The twins learned patience from waiting in long lines. They learned empathy from watching their mother treat everyone with respect, no matter how tired she was. They never asked where their father was, not because they didn't wonder, but because their home was built on presence, not explanation. Estelle made sure love was louder than absence, shaping 2 gentle hearts without ever speaking of the effort it required. There were things Estelle never told anyone, not her coworkers, not the neighbors, not even the children she lived for. She skipped meals more often than she admitted, telling the twins she wasn't hungry while pushing extra portions onto their plates. She wore the same coat year after year, mending the lining herself when the seams finally gave in. When winter came, she taped plastic over the windows to keep the cold out, pretending it was a game so the children wouldn't notice how thin the walls really were. Birthdays were celebrated, with homemade cakes and paper decorations, bright and joyful, hiding the careful planning that made every dollar stretch further than it should. She kept her worries tucked away in a small notebook she hid in the back of a drawer. Numbers, reminders, quiet plans, never allowing the weight of responsibility to show in her voice. Because her children deserved a world that felt safe, even if she had to build it from pieces no one ever saw. Jace listened as Estelle spoke about those years in simple, factual sentences, as though they belonged to someone else's story. He stood at the bus stop with a man's life behind him and a family's truth in front of him, finally understanding the distance he had crossed without ever leaving a mark on the world he'd abandoned. 2 jobs, long mornings, short nights. While he had been signing contracts, she had been teaching 2 small voices how to say please and thank you. While he'd been shaking hands in glass towers, she had been holding fevers at 3 in the morning. The contrast was unbearable. He looked at Leo, who was now showing Charlie how to make her stuffed bear fly, and felt something tighten deep inside him. He had missed first words, first drawings, first questions about the world. All the milestones people hang photos of, gone. He had built a fortune and lost a family in the process, and only now was he seeing the cost of it all. And for the first time since stepping out of that car, Jace understood that no amount of success could make up for the years he never saw. Jace returned to the penthouse later that afternoon alone. The driver had offered to stay, but Jace sent him away. He needed quiet. Not the controlled quiet of boardrooms, but the kind that exposes everything you've been avoiding. The elevator doors opened onto polished floors that reflected light like water. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, bouncing off walls that held nothing personal, nothing warm. No toys on the floor, no drawings taped crookedly to the refrigerator, just artwork chosen by decorators and furniture chosen by price tags. He set his keys on the counter and stood there, unsure what to do next. From the window, the city stretched endlessly, busy with lives that didn't intersect with his. The view had once filled him with pride. Today it felt like proof of distance, how far he had climbed from the people who once mattered most. He moved through the room slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of a table, as if confirming that everything was still real. The penthouse wasn't empty. It was untouched. Jace poured himself a glass of water, then set it down without drinking. Awards lined one wall of the study, their frames catching the afternoon light. Each plaque represented a year of long nights, calculated risks, and sacrifices he once believed were necessary. He read the engraved titles without feeling anything. These were supposed to be milestones, moments people celebrate. Instead, they looked like markers on a road that had led him somewhere he never intended to go. His phone buzzed on the counter. "Kiara, where are you?" The planner is asking questions. He stared at the message, imagining her in the bridal suite surrounded by friends, assuming the only delay in her perfect day was traffic. He had always measured his worth by numbers, growth charts, market shares, expansion targets. But none of that explained why his chest felt hollow, or why 2 children he had just met had already altered the way he saw everything he owned. He leaned against the counter, letting the cool stone press into his palms. For the first time, he wondered whether success meant anything at all when there was no one to share it with. Jace's phone kept lighting up, one message after another, each one tugging him back toward the ceremony he was supposed to be eager for. The tailor had left his jacket draped over a chair. The shoes were still where he'd kicked them off that morning. Everything waited for him to resume the role he had practiced so well. He picked up the jacket and held it in front of him. For a moment, he imagined himself sliding his arms into the sleeves, straightening his cuffs, stepping back into a version of life that was polished and predictable. The lake, the guests, the smiles, a scene that would look perfect in photos even if his heart wasn't in it. His hand tightened around the fabric. A picture of Leo flashed in his mind, earnest eyes, blue striped shoes built for running. Then Charlie, whispering the name of her bear as if it were a secret meant only for him. Jace lowered the jacket slowly, draping it back over the chair. The clock on the wall moved forward with quiet persistence. Each minute carried him closer to vows he no longer trusted himself to speak. He sank onto the edge of the couch and buried his face in his hands. This wasn't doubt about a relationship. It was something deeper, the realization that he was standing at the edge of 2 lives, and stepping fully into one meant walking away from the other forever. His phone vibrated again. "Kiara, please call me." He didn't. The silence pressed in once the phone finally stopped buzzing. Jace sat alone, surrounded by space that echoed his breathing back at him. The penthouse had been designed to impress. Wide rooms, clean lines, glass everywhere. But now it felt like standing inside a monument built to someone else's idea of a good life. He tried calling a friend, then ended the call before it connected. What would he say? That he'd just met 2 children who might be his? That the success everyone admired suddenly felt meaningless? There was no one he could speak to honestly. The people in his world expected confidence, certainty, control. They knew how to celebrate his wins, not how to sit with him while everything he believed in shifted. He walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. Suits hung in perfect order, grouped by color and season. Shoes lined up like they were waiting for inspection. Everything had a place, except him. Jace leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the closet door and closed his eyes. For years he had filled his schedule to avoid moments like this. Meetings, flights, calls that started early and ended late. Being busy had protected him from asking hard questions. Now there was nowhere left to hide. He thought of Estelle standing at the bus stop, steady despite everything she had carried alone. He thought of Leo's fearless questions and Charlie's quiet kindness. And he realized how separate his worlds had become, how alone he truly was inside the life he'd built. In that stillness, one truth settled clearly in his mind. All the space in the world means nothing when there's no one to come home to. Jace arrived at the lakeside venue later than he should have, the sun already lifting high enough to scatter light across the water like loose coins. From the outside, everything looked perfect. White chairs were aligned in flawless rows, pale flowers wrapped around wooden arches. Soft music floated through open doors, carefully chosen to suggest romance without overwhelming it. Guests were already gathering, dressed in their best, smiling the way people do when they believe they are about to witness something beautiful. No one questioned his absence yet. The groom always has reasons, people said. Important reasons. Jay stepped out of the car and stood still. The air carried the faint scent of lilies and fresh-cut grass, a blend that had been chosen because it tested well with planners and photographers. It should have made him feel calm. Instead, it made him feel like a stranger at his own event. A coordinator rushed toward him, relief flooding her face. "Mr. McLaughlin, we were just about to call." "I need a moment," he said. She hesitated, then nodded, motioning him toward a side corridor that led away from the main hall. As he walked, applause drifted through the walls, someone practicing a toast, someone laughing too loudly. He leaned against the cool wooden paneling and closed his eyes. Just hours ago, he had stood on a cracked sidewalk with two children who shared his eyes. Now he was surrounded by silk ribbons and guests who believed they knew his story. But they didn't, and neither did the woman waiting behind the double doors, trusting him to appear and play the role he had agreed to. Jace opened his eyes slowly, the weight of the moment settling into his chest. This wasn't about being late anymore. It was about whether he would keep walking forward, or finally turn toward the life he had left behind. Kiara stood in the bridal suite with her back to the door, one hand resting lightly on the vanity as her friends moved around her, making last-minute adjustments to her hair. She turned when Jace entered. Relief crossed her face first, then confusion. "Where have you been?" she asked, lowering her voice as the others quietly stepped out, sensing something was wrong. Jace closed the door behind him, the soft click louder than he expected. "I'm sorry," he said. "I needed time." Her eyes searched his face. "For what?" He hesitated, the words crowding his throat. "There's something I have to tell you," he said finally. She folded her arms slowly, a protective motion she didn't seem to realize she was making. "You're scaring me." Jace looked down at the floor, then back at her. "On my way here today, I saw someone I used to be with. From years ago." Her expression softened slightly. "Okay, and?" "She wasn't alone," he continued. "She was with two children." Kiara blinked once. "What does that have to do with us?" "They look like me," he said quietly. The room went still. For a moment, Kiara didn't speak. She simply stared at him, as if trying to decide whether he was joking. When she realized he wasn't, her face changed. "You're telling me this now?" she asked. "I didn't know," Jace replied. "I just found out." Her voice trembled. "So what? You're suddenly a father?" "I don't know what I am," he said honestly. "But I can't stand here and pretend my life hasn't just changed." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Today was supposed to be about us." "I know," he whispered. Jace moved closer, stopping just far enough away to respect the boundary that had formed between them. "Kiara, you deserve the truth," he said. "Not the version that fits into a schedule or a seating chart, the real one." Her shoulders lifted as she took a steadying breath. "Then tell me." He nodded slowly. "I spent years believing that if I worked hard enough, if I built something impressive enough, everything else would fall into place. I thought love could wait. I thought the past stayed where you left it." He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "I left someone who believed in me when I had nothing. I didn't keep the promises I made, and today I met two children who may be mine." Kiara's hands trembled at her sides. You're standing here, about to marry me, and telling me your heart is somewhere else. My heart is in question, he said, and I can't give you vows if I don't know who I'm becoming. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything neither of them wanted to face. You're asking me to understand this, she said softly. No, Jace replied. I'm asking myself. Kiara took a step back, as if the room had shifted and she needed space to steady herself. So that's it, she said. After all the planning, all the promises. Jace shook his head slowly. It's not it. It's just the truth finally catching up with me. Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed firm. You're choosing your past over me. He swallowed. I'm choosing responsibility over comfort, and honesty over appearances. She turned toward the mirror, pressing her fingertips to the edge of the vanity. For a moment, Jace thought she might break. Instead, she straightened, lifting her chin. I loved you, she said. I loved the man I thought you were. I know, he replied. And that's why I can't stand here and pretend. A long pause followed. Somewhere outside, music swelled and then softened again, unaware that the ceremony it was meant for was already falling apart. Kiara faced him once more. If you walk out that door, there's no going back. Jace nodded. I understand. She closed her eyes briefly, then stepped aside, clearing a path. Then go, she said quietly, and don't let this be another promise you fail to keep. Jace hesitated only a second before turning toward the door. His hand rested on the handle, the weight of what he was leaving behind settling into his chest. Then he opened it and walked away. Before we follow Jace any further, I want you to pause with me for just a moment. He walked away from a ceremony that looked perfect on the surface. He chose uncertainty over comfort, truth over applause, responsibility over the life he carefully planned. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Jace made the right decision? Would you have stayed and gone through with the ceremony? Or would you have done exactly what he did and walked away to face a past that suddenly became your present? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective matters here. Jace didn't arrive with answers. He showed up with groceries he wasn't sure the kids liked, a backpack filled with coloring books he picked out in a rush, and a nervous energy he couldn't hide. Estelle watched him from the kitchen doorway as he fumbled with the bags, setting things on the counter and then rearranging them as though order might make him feel prepared. You don't have to bring everything at once, she said, not unkindly. I know, he replied, though his voice betrayed how little he actually knew. Leo circled him like a curious cat, inspecting each item as Jace unloaded it. Those are the wrong cereal boxes, Leo announced. Jace blinked. There are wrong ones? Yes, Leo said seriously. We only eat the kind with the honey bear. Jace nodded as if this were critical business. I'll remember that. Charlie sat at the table with Sunny in her lap, watching him with wide eyes. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. Jace knelt beside her. I brought crayons, he said, sliding a box toward her. She opened it slowly, examining each color with care. Thank you, she whispered. Estelle folded her arms loosely, still unsure what role to play in this new scene. She had built a life without him. Now he was standing inside it, trying to learn a language everyone else already spoke. Jace looked around the small apartment, at the chipped paint, the cluttered fridge, the drawings taped to the wall, and realized how unqualified he felt. Yet for the first time in years, he wasn't running from that feeling. He was standing in it. Jace volunteered to make breakfast the next morning. He woke up early, eager to prove he could be useful, only to realize that Estelle's kitchen didn't operate like the gourmet spaces he was used to. The stove clicked twice before igniting. The pan stuck unless you coaxed it just right. The batter didn't behave the way it did in his mind. By the time Leo wandered in rubbing his eyes, smoke was curling toward the ceiling. Are you burning the house? Leo asked. Jace laughed, flipping a pancake that landed half outside the pan. I'm experimenting. Estelle hurried in, opened a window, and took over without a word. She slid a plate in front of the twins while Jace stood there holding a spatula like it had betrayed him. Charlie poked at a dark edge on her pancake. It's okay, she said softly. Mom fixes stuff. Jace smiled, embarrassed and grateful at the same time. After breakfast, they sat at the table with coloring books. Leo drew race cars. Charlie colored flowers around Sunny's ears. Jace joined in, his clumsy sketches earning giggles from both children. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth, but it was real. Later that evening, after homework and stories, Jace helped tuck the twins into their small beds. The room smelled faintly of lavender soap. Nightlights glowed softly, chasing away shadows that didn't need names. Charlie fell asleep quickly, Sunny tucked under her chin. Leo didn't. He lay on his side, facing the wall, unusually quiet. Jace paused at the doorway, sensing something unfinished. "Everything okay?" he asked. Leo didn't turn around. "Are you going away again?" The question wasn't loud. It didn't accuse. It simply existed, heavy with everything a child can't put into words. Jace moved closer and sat on the edge of the bed. "Why would you think that?" Leo shrugged. "People always go." Jace felt his throat tighten. This was the part of fatherhood no instruction manual prepared him for. "The wounds formed long before you arrive." "I don't want to go," Jace said. "I want to stay." Leo rolled onto his back, studying him. "For real." "For real," Jace replied. Leo stared at the ceiling for a moment, then whispered, "Okay." And that single word carried more trust than Jace had earned. Jace stayed by Leo's bedside long after his breathing slowed. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of a distant refrigerator and the soft rhythm of two children finally at rest. He watched their chests rise and fall, memorizing something most people take for granted. Estelle stood in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. "They don't ask questions easily," she said. "Not about things that matter." Jace nodded. "He thinks everyone leaves." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "I never wanted him to feel that way." "You didn't make him feel that way," Jace replied. "I did." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years hanging between them. "I don't expect forgiveness," Jace continued quietly. "I don't even know what I'm capable of yet, but I won't disappear again." Estelle studied him, not with anger, but with caution shaped by experience. "Staying is more than words," she said. "I know," he answered. "That's why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just telling you what I'm going to do." He looked back at the twins, two lives that had moved forward without him, yet somehow left space for him to step into if he was brave enough to try. For the first time, Jace wasn't thinking about next month or next year. He was thinking about tomorrow morning, about cereal boxes, school drop-offs, and the simple act of being present. And he knew, with a clarity that hadn't touched him in a decade, that staying would be the hardest and most important work he had ever chosen. The bike was too big for Charlie. At least that's what Jace thought as he wheeled it down the narrow sidewalk behind the apartment complex. The frame wobbled when she tried to climb on, and her feet barely touched the ground. "I can't," she said quietly. "You can," Jace replied, holding the seat steady. "I've got you." Leo hovered nearby, bouncing with energy. "Push her harder." Estelle watched from the steps, arms folded, trying not to let hope get ahead of proof. Jace crouched in front of Charlie, adjusting her helmet with hands that still felt unsure around small buckles and straps. "We'll go slow," he said. "Just like this." He walked beside her at first, then behind her, one hand on the seat, one on the handlebar. The bike rolled forward in small, careful jerks. Charlie wobbled. "Don't let go," she whispered. "I won't," Jace said. But as her balance steadied, he eased his grip, step by cautious step, until his hands were hovering inches away. "Dad!" Leo shouted. "She's doing it!" Charlie rode 3 full seconds on her own before tipping sideways into the grass, laughing as she fell. Jace rushed forward, heart racing, but she was already sitting up, smiling wide. "Again," she said, and Estelle, watching from the steps, felt something inside her begin to soften. Estelle didn't move from the steps. She told herself it was because the twins didn't need a crowd. But the truth was quieter and harder. She was afraid to step closer to something that had taken so long to live without. Jace jogged back with the bike, brushing dirt from Charlie's knees while Leo talked non-stop about how fast his sister was going. Their laughter carried across the courtyard, light and free. Estelle folded her arms tighter, watching the scene with a mixture of pride and caution. She'd imagined moments like this once, long ago, before life taught her how to stand on her own. Seeing Jace there, kneeling in the grass, listening to Charlie's instructions as if they were sacred, stirred feelings she had carefully set aside. Trust wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a bridge you crossed one step at a time, and for now Estelle was still standing at the edge. The days that followed didn't look dramatic. They were filled with grocery lists taped to the fridge, backpacks forgotten by the door, homework checked while dinner simmered on the stove. Jace didn't try to change the rhythm of the household. He learned it. He showed up for school pickup. He listened when Leo explained why one cartoon was better than another. He learned how Charlie liked her sandwiches cut. Triangles, never squares. Estelle noticed these things without commenting. She watched him wash dishes even when he was tired, watched him sit at the table long after bedtime filling out school forms he didn't yet understand. She watched him ask questions he could have avoided, admit when he didn't know something, and try again anyway. Trust didn't arrive with a single gesture. It grew quietly, the way strength does when no one is counting. One evening, a thunderstorm knocked the power out. The apartment went dark in the middle of dinner, and for a moment, everything froze. No lights, no television, no hum of appliances. Charlie reached for Estelle's hand. Leo groaned about his unfinished show. Jace lit a candle from a drawer, setting it in the center of the table like it was something precious. "Well," he said, "looks like it's story time." He made up a tale about a superhero bear who lost one ear in a daring rescue mission. Charlie clutched Sonny tighter, eyes shining. Leo added sound effects. Estelle laughed, a sound that surprised her as much as anyone. They finished dinner by candlelight, shadows dancing across the walls, their voices filling the space that had once held only quiet effort. Later, as Jace cleaned the dishes and the twins chased each other down the hall, Estelle stood in the doorway and watched the life unfolding in her home. For the first time in years, laughter wasn't something she carried alone. It belonged to all of them. There were no planners this time, no seating charts, no crystal centerpieces, no list of names printed in perfect script, just a small garden behind a community hall, a borrowed arch wrapped with ivy, and two children racing each other between rows of folding chairs. Jace stood at the edge of the grass, watching Leo argue with Charlie about who was supposed to carry the basket of petals. The basket tipped over halfway to the aisle, scattering tiny paper flowers in every direction. Instead of fixing it, Jace laughed. Estelle came to stand beside him, smoothing the front of a simple dress she had chosen because it felt like her, not because it photographed well. "This is not how weddings are supposed to go," she said quietly. "It's exactly how this one is supposed to go," Jace replied. A few friends gathered close. Neighbors who had helped with babysitting, co-workers from Estelle's jobs, people who knew their story without needing explanations. No one was late. No one rushed. The moment waited for them. When Estelle took his hands, Jace felt something steady settle into place. This wasn't about starting over. It was about finally arriving. Leo and Charlie took their roles very seriously, at least for the first 5 seconds. They stood at the start of the aisle, baskets held high, their faces bright with the importance of the task. Then Charlie giggled. Leo tried to copy her, and suddenly both of them tipped their baskets forward at once. Petals fluttered down in a colorful rush, long before anyone had begun walking. Estelle covered her mouth, laughing. Jace bent forward with his hands on his knees, laughing harder than he had in years. "Oops," Charlie said, staring at the empty basket. Leo shrugged. It was heavy. No one asked them to fix it. The scattered petals lay wherever they fell, turning the aisle into a path that looked like life itself, unplanned, imperfect, full of bright pieces where you didn't expect them. The guests smiled, not because things were going right, but because they were going honestly. Jace took a breath before he spoke. There was no microphone, no audience stretching into the distance, just Estelle's eyes, steady and watchful, and the twins fidgeting beside her, trying not to step on the petals they'd spilled too soon. "I spent a long time thinking success was something you earned alone," he said. "I thought if I worked hard enough, I could make everything else wait." He paused, gathering the right words. "I left the people who believed in me when I had nothing. I missed moments I can never get back, and I built a life that looked impressive but didn't feel like home." Estelle listened without interrupting, her hands warm in his. "Meeting Leo and Charlie didn't just change my plans," Jace continued. "It changed me. It showed me that being present is worth more than any title or headline." He swallowed, emotion tightening his voice. "I don't promise perfection. I promise honesty. I promise to be here for scraped knees, school meetings, quiet evenings, and hard conversations. Not because I owe it, but because I choose it." The twins looked up at him then, sensing the weight of the moment even if they didn't fully understand it. and Jace knew that these words mattered more than any he had spoken in a boardroom. Estelle held Jace's hands as he finished speaking, feeling the faint tremble in his fingers. She had learned not to trust easily, not after carrying so much alone, not after teaching herself how to be strong when no one else showed up. But strength had a cost. It made you careful. It made you quiet with hope. She looked down at Leo and Charlie first. Leo was standing tall, chest puffed out like he was part of something heroic. Charlie leaned into her side, Sonny tucked under one arm, watching Jace with eyes that held more certainty than questions. Then Estelle lifted her gaze to the man who once left and now stood asking without demanding to belong again. "I didn't wait for you," she said softly. "I didn't pause my life. I built something real without you because I had to." Jace nodded, accepting every word. "But," she continued, her voice steady, "I see how you show up now. Not with speeches, not with money, but with mornings and homework and burnt pancakes and patience." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I don't need perfection either," she said. "I need presence. I need effort. I need someone who understands that love is work you choose every day." She squeezed his hands gently. "So I'm not choosing the man you were. I'm choosing the one who stands here today." And for the first time in years, Estelle allowed herself to believe in something she had once buried. That sometimes people don't come back to fix the past. They come back to build the future. If this story moved you even a little, take a moment right now to show your support. Tap the like button so more people can discover stories that remind us what really matters. Share this with someone who believes that second chances are worth fighting for. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mr. Williams Storytime so you never miss a powerful lesson wrapped inside a heartfelt story. Before you go, leave a comment telling us what part of Jason Estelle's journey touched you the most. Your words help this community grow. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.